I played rugby in high school, and then when I was
That's an interesting tidbit.
when I was in college, I had a bunch of friends who played rugby. I couldn't because I was a dance major. So those two.
You were a dance major?
This is like
Yeah.
the
Why did I
perfect
not
two-sentence
do that?
explanation of his life.
All right.
Any
Are we
notes from
ready?
you guys on where I'm sitting, how I'm doing?
You look great.
You look good.
Yeah.
Good.
Are we already recording?
Yeah.
We've been.
Okay.
You're gonna do a blooper reel. You probably have too much to do a
I
blooper
should.
reel when you're
That's
working
like
with Neil.
that's my life.
Yeah.
My life
I
is the
really
blooper
should.
reel.
And action.
Welcome to Under Fire, burning questions about poverty and policy with the Port Angeles Food Bank. You can edit that part out.
I'm not taking that out.
Right? Each episode, we turn up the heat, literally and figuratively, by inviting local leaders to take on a lineup of hot wings while answering tough questions about food insecurity, housing, and what it takes to really build a more just Clallam County. Oh, is that okay?
That's good enough.
Okay. See if I can do this next sentence. I'm Neil Dexter.
That's a tough one.
I forgot who I was. I'm Neil Dexter, donor relationship manager with the Port Angeles Food Bank. Today's guest, I didn't change that. You're not Marco Zayas.
I'm not Marco Zayas.
What if I say that though? Today's guest is Clallam County Commissioner Mike French.
It's great to be here.
Fantastic. We're honored to have him in the hot seat today as we talk about the challenges and opportunities facing our community. Again, a huge thank you to our sauce donors, Woodinville Sauce Company, Seafire Gourmet, and Bootsy's Sauce Company. This show wouldn't be nearly as sweaty without you. Mike, before we get started, do you want to tell us a little about what your role is as a county commissioner?
Sure. I'm a Clallam County Commissioner. I serve District 3, which is roughly the western third of Port Angeles, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So it's this huge geographic region. I represent a lot of the really remote and rural areas in Clallam County. Forks, Joyce, the North Coast, Clallam Bay, CQ, La Push, Nia Bay. And so there's a lot of land, a lot less density, but a lot of really important communities that have been really welcoming to me as someone who grew up in Port Angeles. There's definitely this, which side of the LY are you on? And what I've found is if you show up to meetings, if you show up and talk to people, they're pretty welcoming out there. So that's the district I serve. And I'm in my first term. It's been a huge learning curve. I was previously a member of the Port Angeles City Council for 5 years. And I thought, I got this down. I know what this is all about. Let's move up to the next level. And then I had to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. And I feel like that was a real tough learning curve, but I really welcomed it. I think that it's been a lot of fun. The great thing about being a commissioner is every day is different. You get to dip your toe into a lot of different policy areas and have a lot of different interactions with a lot of different parts of the community. And so it's a very rewarding position. It's really difficult. With my tongue in my cheek, I usually explain it to people that when you're a county commissioner, my job is attending meetings professionally. That's what I do.
Sounds hard.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, for most people, they can stomach, going to one city council meeting a year roughly. That's how, with the level of boredom and the level of interest that they have, that's where they usually hit. And so I do those, every day it feels like.
Yeah.
But like I said, I really do enjoy the job. You get to meet a lot of really cool people and interact with a lot of cool different parts of the community.
Let's get started.
I love it.
Let's do wing one. Our first sauce is Dos Aches from Woodinville Sauce Company. Maybe edit this part out. Cheers. I got the whole bottle.
I like that one.
All right, question number one. Let's start simple. What's your go-to comfort food, and what memories does it bring back?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is spaghetti. When I was a kid, that was just something my mom made. It was my favorite dinner. Still is. The one deep regret that I have in life is that my stomach doesn't like tomato acidity as I grew older, and I get heartburn now whenever I have tomato sauce. But it still is my favorite. I'll take the heartburn. I have my Tums handy.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But then of course, the other comfort food, breakfast food is always my comfort food. I owned a breakfast restaurant for many years, and so ate breakfast 2 meals a day most days. So yeah, just generally anything that's a little bit of sugar and for me a lot of carbs. I love the carbs. Pounding those in, the pancakes, the French toast. Yeah,
it's not carb absent.
It's not carb absent, especially when you got your garlic bread on the side. Or whatnot. Yeah.
But isn't that funny? Let's have spaghetti. Let's have a big bowl of
Right.
carbs. Well,
Let's side it with some
what's
carbs.
it missing? What's it missing?
Yeah.
Bread. Our second sauce is La Diosa Verde from Seafire Gourmet.
Green sauce, all right.
Green sauce, the green goddess.
You keep on just going crazy on yourself.
It like let's go right at that point. All right. Cheers
Cheers.
again.
It's got a little heat.
Yeah, kind of comes in the end. All right. While you chew, I'll ask you a question. Clallam County has a strong sense of community. What's something you love about the way we show up for each other?
So I very much agree with that. For me, of course, like I said, I have that third district, which is the West End. My favorite thing is how even the smallest areas around really come together when they have a community need to figure it out. That's my favorite thing about the West End and Clallam County and being part of that community. Seeing, you go out to Forks, little tiny town in the middle of nowhere. They've been hit with, a lot of difficult economic factors, 3,500 folks, and they raise a ridiculous amount of money for their graduating high school senior class. And it's because their community really just says, this is what's important. They had, so those are the kind of stories that really, I think are really fun to see, even in the teeniest, tiniest little communities, you have people coming together and saying, let's make it happen. And that's one of the fun things about being a commissioner is you get to sometimes be interacting with some of these really small community groups, trying to solve problems and trying to get them together, and you see how people can just really make something out of nothing.
Well, would you say that something like the high school senior class, that's a really cool example. Do you think that's something that transcends demographics, or is that something that that would be specific to a demographic?
I think it definitely transcends. One of the fun things is their big fundraiser for that high school senior graduating class in Forks is an auction. And you go out there and you see just people from all different walks of life. You see, people that are still in the industry and logging, and they'll all be, bidding on a pie. And I went out there my first year as commissioner, and I failed to win an auction for a pie because they were getting up to $80-$90 for a blackberry pie or something. And I was just like, I can't stick with these guys. And it's because they know this is what's important to the community. So I do think it's something that, we'd often be surprised how generous some of these communities are, especially when, they believe in their future. They're doing this for the kids.
Right. Which is refreshing in an era where it's so easy to feel like we're just so divided.
Yep.
To see multiple different demographics probably don't always agree on every issue. Maybe some are red and some are blue, but
absolutely.
But for the kids or for the for the graduating class, that's
and
really
I think
cool.
you can find examples of that kind of stuff all around the county, in the big cities, in Port Angeles, Swim, and some of the small rural outlying areas. And so that is something that gives me a lot of hope.
Our next sauce is Santaka from Woodinville Sauce Company. There.
All right.
Cheers. Definitely fruity.
Definitely fruity.
It's nice. I almost feel like there's the heat. It really kind of hides behind the sugar. Number 3, food insecurity can be invisible to those not looking for it. What does food insecurity look like in Clallam County today? Do you think there is a stigma associated with food insecurity in our community? I understand that's a few-part question.
Yeah.
Feel free to answer whichever part you want.
So food insecurity, I think it's something that, there's still definitely stigma. I think that, the way that food banks organize can sometimes play into that stigma or remove that stigma. I think Port Angeles Food Bank's a great example of, hey, we're just going to create a shopping experience. And I think that's a really cool way to just remove some of that stigma and just say this is a normal shopping experience that everyone has. That's how our clients experience the food bank. Out on the West End, I feel like it's really more about food deserts. That's how food insecurity manifests. There's just a lot of area where there's not a lot of options. The distance from one grocery to the next is sometimes very long, and there's a lot of people in between those two places. And so it's definitely, I think, manifests different ways throughout the county. And I think that, anything that we can do to try to, normalize that this is just something that some people need help with. Sometimes it's temporary help, sometimes it takes them a little longer, and that's totally fine and normal.
In that perspective, then the food insecurity would be less about financial access to food, but more financial access to transportation.
Absolutely.
If I don't have a working car, then
100%.
I can't get to
Yes.
food.
And sometimes it's also, how easy is it to access fresh groceries, fresh produce? How easy is it to access, gas station food? Right?
Yeah.
That's part of the aspect too. It's usually like, I was in Clallam CQ last night, and on my way back, I grabbed a corn dog from the gas station, right? Because I didn't want to eat a full dinner necessarily. There's not that many options. Although they did just have a restaurant open up, so I probably could have stopped there. But, that's the easy, quick thing to do, is to grab something that's really not that nutritious, and to have a quick snack. And that's the kind of life experience that those are the choices that people have to make. Do you actually drive half an hour to go get fresh groceries like in Forks?
Yeah.
Or do you eat what's there 5 or 10 minutes away because it's accessible
and I would argue too that that's not something that people talk about when they talk about inflation as regards to food. Is if gas prices go up and I have to drive a half an hour both ways to get to food, well, that's an added cost. I have to tack that onto whatever grocery bill I have. I spend an extra $12 in gas just to get there.
And that's definitely the lived experience of people on the West End, is transportation being that barrier and time being that barrier too, right? When you're going to have to factor in half an hour for this drive, half an hour for that drive, that's an additional little cost that you have to plan into your day.
Well, I mean, to add a whole hour just to go to the grocery store, that could be.
And I definitely think about that in my life, so many times, because I live in the city of Port Angeles. I'm like, oh, we have this idea for dinner. Let's run to Safeway. Let's do this or that. That's easy, but if
kind
it
of
was
nothing's out of the way in Port Angeles.
Exactly. If the decision was, let's drive half an hour each way so that we can make this fresh meal, that's, probably a healthier choice. It's a lot more fun to cook with your family, blah, blah, blah. But
instead you might just look in the freezer.
We might just look in the freezer.
Yeah.
This one definitely did have a little more heat at the end.
Yeah.
I'm still getting a little bit of it. It's not overwhelming, right? It's pretty,
no, it's a slow tingle. All right, our next sauce, the garlic habanero. This one should really freak you out, because the word habanero is the second word.
Yeah. Habanero is not a great word.
If you were a vampire, it would really freak you out too. But
yeah.
Seafire Gourmet, garlic habanero. This one's a little chunkier. Whoa, geez.
All right.
Cheers. It's interesting. You get the sweetness
Right away
from the garlic, and then it hits the top of your nose with all that aromatic, and then there it is.
Yeah.
All right, while you chew and cough and avoid milk, I will ask the next question. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. These are households that earn more than the federal poverty level, but not enough to afford the basics where they live. ALICE households and households in poverty are forced to make tough choices, such as deciding between quality childcare or paying the rent. 43% of Clallam County lives below the ALICE threshold. From where you sit, what are some of the biggest systemic barriers that keep people below this threshold and struggling to afford food?
It's a great question. I'm definitely feeling the heat on this one too.
Yeah.
It's there.
Trying to ask the question was a little trickier.
So Alice, asset limited, what's the IC? It's asset limited.
Asset limited, income constrained, employed. So these are people that are working.
They have jobs, they're working, right? Yeah. And so it's a great question, and I think that some of the barriers, number one is wages, right? Like, do you have access to a job that'll actually meet your needs from a wage perspective? I think one of the other barriers that we don't talk about as much is just availability of work, availability of hours. So like I ran a restaurant in downtown Port Angeles for 15 years. We had great employees. Obviously it's an industry that doesn't pay great wages, but most of the time for a lot of my employees, it was just about hours that were available, especially in the off season, right? So you have this seasonality sometimes to the work. A lot of employers really are just super overtime averse. And so they go way beyond, and they're scheduling you for 30 hours a week. Mm-hmm. So even, in Washington State, if you're a server, you're getting minimum wage plus tips. It's a minimum wage job, but the tips make it you're getting a couple hours more dollars per hour. But if you're only working 30 hours a week, that's not going to do it.
Right.
And so there's a couple different, things. So number one is, I think, of course we need more family wage jobs. We need to find jobs that actually can provide enough from a wage perspective and an hours perspective the other challenge is, we're always going to have a service industry. We're always going to have people who serve us, and I think those people deserve dignity in their work. Doing that work for 15 years, that's you get convinced very early on that people should treat service workers better, both from a relationship perspective, but also from a wage perspective.
People should always have a job as a server. Like, it should kind of be our requirements for life. Like, in order to graduate high school, you have to work a summer as a server, and you have to work a summer as a dishwasher.
Yeah.
Your understanding of what people are doing to provide the simplest of things for you.
Yep. That we take for granted.
Yeah.
That if anything goes wrong, sometimes you're just ready to snap about it and say, "How dare you? I want to speak to the manager."
And these are just people.
They're just people. They're trying to.
They're trying to do as good as they can.
So we're always going to have a service industry. I think that doing more to expand, to get rid of the seasonality of our area is something that I think we should be working on. I know there are people that are working on that. Places like Field Hall, they're going to try to bring in conventions in the off season and the shoulder seasons. That can do a lot for restaurants. If you have this influx of people just coming here for a weekend or a week to do a convention, they're going to need to eat. That makes it a lot more profitable for the restaurant owner, so they can keep their staff on, so they don't have to have this cycle of layoffs and then hiring up for the summer.
Yeah.
That's not good for anyone. It's not good for workers. It's not good for the restaurants, honestly. It's not good for the service, the retail and the service industry places either. So
at the end of the day, if we have jobs that are doing more, that are where we're creating a product, I think that's its own thing. I'm very much like a Luddite on some level. I don't think technology is going to save all of us.
Right.
I think we still have to make something. And so that's where those family wage jobs are really meaningful, because when you're making something, there's usually multiple steps along the way. So it's not like, if you create this one business, you're usually creating a couple others too.
So I guess a follow-up question that I've wondered about, and I'd love to get your take on, when we talk about asset limited, income constrained, and employed, the primary relationship there is wage and poverty level.
Yeah.
And where various service organizations cut off people and cap people, I would argue that one systemic barrier is the cliff, and the service cliff or poverty cliff. And if we were simply to raise the maximum wage you could make to meet the cutoff, so that that seems so simple, and yet I understand there's a lot more math that goes into it. But I'm curious your take on where we could do that and why it is that we don't do that.
So I think that there's a lot of things to talk about. We can get real deep if we want on this one. We might need more another wing here, but so one is a phase out, right? That's one of the things that I think is a solution to that, where you have, okay, if you're below this level, you get these benefits. If you're above it, you get nothing, right? And so we get these donut holes as people are working. And I experienced this as a business owner, where I would have an employee who, during the summer, I had this huge demand, and I wanted to put as many hours on the schedule as I could because we had people lining up outside the door. And she would have to say, no, I can't work more hours, because then 6 months from now, when the state Medicaid office calls, my kid who has asthma is going to lose Apple Health.
Because she made too much.
Because she would make too much.
Yeah.
To some extent, her problem, this happened before the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
To some extent, the Medicaid expansion solves her specific problem, but then that just shifts it up to making a little bit more, right?
But I would argue too, that's not her specific case is unique, but that specific issue isn't unique.
Correct.
And so how do we?
So one of the ways is that when we create benefit programs, we create a really generous phase out. That's one of the ways. And I think that the Affordable Care Act is an example of how that phase out works, where at this level, you become eligible to be enrolled in Medicaid. Above that, you start with tax credits where you could buy insurance on the private market, and those tax credits phase out, and they had a pretty long, generous phase out. There's a similar phase out for things like the child tax credit, although that might have changed. I don't keep that close of track to federal policy all that time. And so phase outs is one of the tools the policymakers have to make sure those benefit cliffs don't exist. The point that you made about, well, if we help bring minimum wage up to make sure that it can meet people's basic needs, I support that. I think that makes sense. I think that it's also inflationary. And so that's the balancing act that policymakers have to address. There's a book actually written by Elizabeth Warren and her daughter called The Two-Income Trap that really talked about kind of the basic supply and demand economics of some of these policy choices. As women entered the workforce, post World War II, you ended up with a lot of families that had a lot more household income, but they didn't actually have a better quality of life because they just drove up the price of a bunch of different types of social products, childcare, secondary education, because they had a lot more money to access it, but we didn't increase the supply of those things. We didn't increase the supply of childcare. We didn't increase the amount of slots at good universities. So there's multiple problems that policymakers have to be addressing when they do one intervention. Often there's these other dominoes that fall.
Right. Would you say then that raising the cutoff rate to match so that we could eliminate the cliff, would that be inflationary as well then, do you think?
I don't know.
If we just provided services to a greater amount of income so that there wasn't people who...
I think it's a good idea. And I also think that what's our capacity to provide those services, it becomes the next question, right? So we still have to then have the capacity to do that.
Right.
It's going to cost money, and that's a good problem to have. Like, we should provide for people's basic needs on those levels. I think I agree with you on that.
Stands to reason.
Yeah.
All right.
Those are tough questions, and I think policymakers struggle with them. And they're good things to talk about. For sure.
Well, I think we could do a whole episode.
We could do a whole episode
just
on
this
that.
question.
It's really interesting stuff, and I really appreciate there's a couple organizations that are really focusing on those ALICE people, asset limited,
income constrained,
employed people. I know
Yeah.
United Way has made that a focus.
Yeah.
I think that's a great target audience to focus on, because again, these are people that are doing important jobs for our community. They're serving our community. They're working. They're not doing anything wrong. And that was something I always felt as a business owner. I had a couple employees that I remember still to this day. It's like they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't get pregnant as a teenager. They weren't doing drugs, right? They were doing all the things that they were supposed to do, and they were still struggling. And that doesn't seem right. So
No, and the Alice issue I think really kind of goes back in the face of any lawmaker that uses the narrative that people who use services are lazy and don't work and don't want to work. And I think just in Port Angeles alone, there's a ton of people that would like to work, and there are jobs. But most of these people who want to work don't qualify for the jobs that are available. Or even more frustrating is when you find someone who, I could take that job, but then I'm going to get kicked off all my services. So you're Alice folks, where you suddenly end up in a position where I can't afford to work.
Another little wrinkle to this is minimum wage law and overtime law. If you're working for one employer and you work 80 hours a week, you have 40 hours of overtime.
Yeah.
For two employers and you work 80 hours a week, you have 0 hours of overtime.
Right.
And so that's another, it's not always just a simple work more. So that's the other side of that coin. Yeah. People are put in tough situations. A lot of times they're making rational decisions about their specific, life.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that you made that pitch there. I think it's a good one to make.
All right. I'll do it again.
Yeah.
I'll do it again. All right, number 5. We have the Fire Roasted Fresno. Fire Roasted Fresno from Bootsy's Sauce Company.
See, Fresno doesn't sound bad. Fresno's a friendly pepper, right?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's super friendly.
Thank you, sir. Oh, yeah. This one just comes right out.
And it's got whole seeds and stuff in it.
You can see there.
All right, yeah, this one's pretty good.
All right. Enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers. Ooh. It's milder on, I don't want to say flavor. It's a subtler, a much more subtle flavor.
Yeah.
And I think what you're getting is a lot more actual chili flavor.
Mm-hmm.
There's no fruit, there's no smoke, there's nothing kind of hiding. And then eventually, I feel like this would be one if you ate 10 wings. By the last one, you're eating it.
Right.
This one takes a little while to kind of kick
It's
in.
a lot more subtle. I like
Yeah. Port Angeles used to be a logging town with union jobs and a strong working class base. As we've shifted to a service and tourism economy, what impact has that had on our community?
So it's had a huge impact. And again, that's where we come back to we need more family wage jobs, and that's because we lost a huge amount of them over the last few decades, and we haven't really replaced them with like jobs. And so that's, I think, something we talk about a lot at our level. We have joint meetings with the port. We talk to the EDC. We have this larger regional effort. We were the recipients of a grant called the Recompete grant. And with that grant, we were able to kind of create a regional strategic economic and workforce development plan. It's called our Recompete plan. We did it in conjunction with Jefferson County. And so we got all these folks together, and we decided to take a specific industrial focus on that plan with respect to the fact that we need more family wage jobs. And so we said, we think that if we can make some really targeted investments in natural resources, the industry, and the industry of maritime and maritime services, we think we can actually do some real good and create some more links between some of these specific businesses within these sectors. Because one of the consequences of losing a lot of that sector over the last couple of decades is when you have these industries that are just trying to hold on to what they have, they don't really spend a lot on R&D. They don't really spend a lot on innovating on new ideas. So I think there's actually a lot of room for the public sector to go in and say, let's try some new stuff and see if we can get private industry to come alongside us if we make some of the investments up front. So that's kind of the strategy that we've been going through, and we really think that that's our chance to find people that have really been kind of chewed up and spit out by the system and say, do you want to take a chance on a new trade, a new skill, a new direction? And so it's a pretty big grant. We've had a lot of local input into it. We're going to roll it out over 5 years, and we're going to really hope that it's impactful. It addresses a lot of things that we've been talking about. We specifically targeted some voucher programs for our recipients, for people who are not in the workforce, who we're going to try to train to do industrial jobs. Some of the vouchers, for transportation, because we recognize that's a barrier. We have cash vouchers for childcare access because we recognize that's a barrier. That's why some people aren't in the workforce. Yeah. But we did that, I think, specifically because we understand the barrier cliff exists.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, not the barrier cliff. The benefit. We did that because
the benefit cliff.
The benefit cliff exists.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, I'm curious. You said family wage jobs. Is there a number specifically tied to that?
Yeah.
Also, can you define that?
Sure. So for us, we did kind of an average. So there's a couple ways to talk about it. One of the ways is we just tried to distill from across our 2-county region, what's the starting point? And we targeted $26 an hour plus benefits as the starting point. And we really want that to be the floor. We don't want that to be, when after you're in that industry 5 years later, you should not be making that. It should have that upward track. And we did that just kind of as an average. In reality, what you need to support a family in Port Angeles is actually probably a little bit more than what you need in Forks. There are some cost of living differences on the peninsula that are meaningful, but we kind of averaged it out at $26 an hour plus benefits. The other way to talk about it is our median wage, and every job that you're creating that's below our county's median wage, you're dragging our median wage down. Every job you're creating that's above our county's median wage, you're dragging our median wage up. And so those are the jobs that we want to focus on. And that's one of the reasons we had that industrial focus, because we know those are jobs that generally are paying above our county's median wage.
To follow up to that as well, the term family wage job. Now, I hear that and think traditional family, husband, wife, 2.5 kids, and a dog. I'm not sure that even exists anymore. Is it specific to a multi-human endeavor, or is it more that I'm just trying to understand why we use the term family wage and not living wage, or family wage and not individual wage, and is there a disparity between how we feel about on a policy level, I guess, how we feel about dependents or not having dependents? And I'm assuming that's kind of where the term family wage job comes from, is that it's implying that you are not just responsible for yourself, but also for paying for one or two other or seven other humans as well.
Yeah, so for me, it's probably because I'm just lazy with my words, that I just say the words that I'm comfortable with. But on some level, yeah, I think it's because we have a couple different economic measurements, and one is what does a single person need to afford rent and basic needs and all those things, and what does a family of four need? And so family of four is kind of the cookie cutter box that we use to say family wage.
Okay.
But I'm not, I don't, however people want to organize their families is up to them. I think that the other thing to talk about is that like this used to be how it worked. It used to be possible in America for one person's wage to support
A family.
2 adults and 2 kids or whatever. Yeah, a family.
Yeah.
And
Funny that was minimum wage at one point.
yeah, I know. and obviously, like at some point in like the early '80s, you get this big convergence between productivity and wages. And for up to that point in the 20th century, after the New Deal, you really had wages and productivity going up at the same rate, and then there's this huge divergence. And we're now at the 40 years later moment.
Yeah. Still
where
waiting for it to trickle
productivity
down.
is way up here.
It's on its way.
And productivity,
Just got to be patient.
and wages are not.
It's going to trickle down any minute now.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Because of the Recompete effort, I just attended a convening at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government this last April with Susie Ames from Peninsula College and Greg Brotherton from Jefferson County. And it was a convening by their government policy arm of Harvard that was really studying place-based interventions. And one of the things they were talking about is industrial policy on the federal level is often really the scattershot approach. It's really broad. You end up saying, we want to invest in this, or whatever it is, and they use things like tax credits, where that drives businesses to do the activity that the government wants to do. But the benefits are really high variance. One region might have a lot of the benefits, one region might have none of them. And so that's the rationale for a place-based strategy, is because some places have just been left behind.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, it's true of like the Rust Belt, where you have American manufacturing that went overseas and they kind of were hollowed out. It's true in Appalachia. It's true in our region. We were one of those places where we didn't have that same, growth pattern that the rest of the United States did, and the data shows it. And so that's the rationale of why we were a Recompete winner, is because we were able to show our work and say, we were left behind. Here's how we can get back, and at least here's our attempt.
Yeah. Here's an idea.
Here's an idea.
Yeah.
And they liked our ideas, thankfully.
Aloha from hell from Bootsy's Sauce Company. We are in the top 5 now, so
We're in the size where they started using hell in their name.
It starts to get a little bit heated.
I feel like my mouth hasn't been destroyed yet. I feel like, was it this guy or that guy gave me a little bit of good?
I think I
think it was this guy right there.
Yeah, had a nice like
But I don't think
lingering.
we've been destroyed yet, so
No.
I'm feeling okay. We'll see how it goes from here.
Gotcha.
This is the one
Whoa.
that's really torn.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is the clip.
Yeah. I mean, immediately in the back of your nose, you're like, oh, that's gonna hurt. I'm gonna feel that. All right.
This is one to reach for the milk on.
It might be. It might be. So, some people in our community feel ashamed to ask for help when it comes to food. How do we shift the culture so that seeking support is seen as strength, not failure?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have any necessary answers, but it's a good thing to talk about. I'm going to take a weird angle, I think, on this one.
Okay.
I grew up in church. I grew up in a really religious family, and really a common thing that we did was potlucks. We got everybody together, we broke bread, we ate. Everybody brought something. There's no requirement that everyone brings the same value. There's no requirement that everyone brings the same quantity. Everyone just brings something and eat what you need. And I think that used to be a really common model for community gatherings. And at some point, America has gotten less religious, church attendance is down. There's a lot of other ways to do that. And I think that building community around food is a good thing. So that's my pitch, is like, have community potlucks, have neighborhood potlucks.
Yeah.
People don't have to bring the same economic value to it. Bring something that makes them feel like they did something and they contributed. That gives them, a sense of community and a sense of value, and then give to people what they need. And I think that's kind of and so we have community organizations like that in Clallam County that do that work regularly. We have Granges.
Yeah.
Right? They do that work regularly. Out in Forks, we have a community association that does just a community dinner every so often, and they fundraise for it through charity, but anyone's welcome. There's no income check. There's no, you don't have to show that like you need it. It's just come and have a good time, eat some food. And so like, I love that kind of community building that can happen around food. That's a very human thing. We break bread.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think, you know, to get back to the actual, I'll leave it there and you can ask follow-ups if you want. But
Well,
that's my pitch.
no, yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say I also grew up Lutheran, and that was something that we did at least once a month. Was a big potluck, and yeah, it wasn't. I mean, I was a kid, so I don't know.
And I mean, as kids, but I'm going to see if you had the same experience as me. I'm sure there were people in my parents' church that were very different places on the asset scale, on the income scale.
Absolutely.
I didn't know who they were.
No, I had no
I couldn't
idea.
have picked them out as kids.
No, it was only when I went back as a young adult, 25 plus, and having had experienced some hardship, having had to use some services, and showing up to an event like that and feeling that shame of I didn't bring anything, or I brought a bag of chips, you know, because it's what I could afford that day. And just feeling welcomed and feeling supported. I don't know that answers the question.
I don't think it does.
But it does speak to your it speaks to your experience as well, I think. And I feel like that is something that is, I don't know if it's lacking per se these days, but our hyper individualism. It's a great asset in that you know we all want to be unique and individual. Also, I think it hurts us sometimes.
Totally agree.
Because we judge ourselves off so many false comparisons and.
And so on that, I think individualism, you know, rugged individualism is this thing that's deeply ingrained into American society. I also think it's just not really how humans work.
Right.
And I think even if you go to some of the places that are the most like ideologically independent and, you know, individual, you go to Forks, they're one of the most tight-knit communities you'll ever find. They help each other.
It's an oxymoron, right?
It is.
You know, I want to be a
think
cowboy.
that's a credit to their, you know, their humanity. I think they're, you know, again, like you look at what they raise for their high school graduating class every year. It's like $200,000. Do you think there's $200,000 like to float that's just floating around in the city of Forks? There's not. They work their butts off to raise that money because they care, because they have this strong sense of community. So the heat's really getting to me now. I can feel it deep in my throat.
Yeah, that one has a burn. I think it's funny. It's one of the more innocuous seeming questions, but I think it's actually one of the harder ones to answer. And I think, ironically, I think it's because I can't answer for you.
Yeah.
I'm an individual, and I can't answer for you.
The other thing that comes to my mind about it is, like, I think asking for help is just hard for all of us. I remember, you know, being a business owner, and I remember one summer, I was a fairly young business owner. We had this busy summer day, and at the end of the day, the waitress, who was like 10, 15 years older than me, like walked me outside and sat me down and said, "You need to ask for help more often." Because like the tickets weren't coming out fast enough.
Right.
And I wasn't saying, "Hey, come up, I need help on this order," or whatnot. And she just sat me down and told me that.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit, you know, embarrassing.
Yeah.
It was a little bit like a hit to my ego, but she was right. Like, and that was a lesson that like she forced me to learn. I didn't have a choice whether I was going to learn that lesson or not. Well, it was a really good lesson.
Well, and it's so interesting because I read a quote, and I'm gonna butcher the crap out of it, but I read a quote the other day that spoke to leadership, and you know, leadership is not good leadership isn't how far you got yourself; it's how far you got the people that you led. And so, you know,
That's,
in a leadership position, and I feel like we all like to think of ourselves, I'm the leader in my own life. So asking for help, like, well, I failed, right? But no, if I ask for help, I'm bringing everyone else up with me. Well, maybe the way to change that is to just talk about it more.
I agree.
And are you
We'll
ready?
see how I do. I'm ready.
You want to hand me the sauce?
What are we on? Reaper?
Wait.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Reaper doesn't sound like a good word. That one just got like some vinegar back in the back of my throat.
Yeah.
Get ready for this one.
All right.
Is this the worst?
Reaper from Seafire Gourmet. It's definitely one of the worst.
Oh,
Yes.
boy.
Yes. It is where it is on the lineup, because I think we had already destroyed our pallets. I think we did go. I think we tried.
So I have some hope, is what you're saying at the end. These are not going to like destroy me necessarily.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that
You're saying you have no idea how hot these are because this one kills you.
Yeah. I think this one. I think we tried this one like after the ghost or after the mango head.
All right.
So I think our pallets were already shot, and there was just very little way to perceive the difference in how spicy.
Every once in a while, I like swallow or something, and then like I get it again.
Yeah.
I get the aloha from hell again.
I
was
remember
just-
Mark had problems with this one.
All right.
Here we go. No turning back.
Cheers. You shrug now. There it is. Yeah. Told you. Yeah. It gives you a nice false sense of calm. You're like, oh, maybe it's not going to be so bad.
Flavor wise, it was really good.
It's delicious. I mean, this is one of those fun. Words are hard now. It's one of the things where, in a lot of peppers, the spicier the pepper, the more flavor it actually has. But your body just has to get past
Right.
the burn, and it's
Now I
there.
see, oh my god, I'm on fire.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Not past it yet.
No, definitely not.
Carolina Reaper peppers. All right.
Yeah, they did that.
Oh boy.
Okay, are you ready?
No.
Nice tough question for you.
Yeah.
Tourism brings money to towns like ours, but it can also raise housing costs and stretch local resources. I'm not done. We hear many stories of workers being priced out of town. Restaurant staff, teachers, grocery workers. How do we make sure working people can afford to live in the communities they serve?
This is a really tough question, and it's the thing that I think we spend probably the most time on as county commissioners is those kind of things. So first, I'm gonna, on some level, stand up for tourism. Like I said, when we're targeting like how we want to spend our efforts and our funds on economic development, we usually don't target tourism because it usually pays below our median wage and it's dragging our median wage down. When we make specific investments, we're usually trying to target how do we create jobs that are industrial, that are really, have those higher wages.
Would you say it's a timing issue more than anything? So by industrial, do you mean something that is going to pay a family wage
Yeah.
all year long versus
Well-
tourism being seasonal?
I think it's just the difference of like, when you start at a mill, you're starting at 26 or 27 bucks an hour. When you're starting at a restaurant, you're starting at minimum wage, mostly. But at the same time, I do think the tourism industry brings us a lot. I think that, obviously we live in a beautiful area. We want amenities. The ppressure of tourism provides businesses a reason to provide those amenities, and then we all get to enjoy them. And so, Ryan Mullane from Blackball, who passed away a few years ago, he would always say that tourism was the tip of the investment spear. That it's what brings us the reason to have nicer things. So, an example, in Port Angeles, we have a great BMX track. My kids play on the BMX track. A lot of the investments that were made because of tourism, because we can bring in visitors for big tournaments and big races. But it's something that we get to enjoy. So I don't want to like just spend the whole time talking about how bad tourism is. I do think that it provides a lot of value to our region. Mm-hmm. It provides jobs. People need jobs. People need introductory jobs. People need to build a resume. There's a lot of reasons why it's a good thing. But I think the question is correct. It provides a lot of pressure for us to have cheap housing, and we don't. And then tourism also says, well, we also want really nice housing that our tourists can stay in.
Yeah.
Right, with short-term rentals and things like that. And so the housing that we do have is stretched in both directions, and that's a lot of pressure that we haven't been able to handle.
Right.
The other part of that puzzle is we had decades where our cities really didn't have pro-growth housing policies. The county, since the 90s, has kind of been, under the regulatory arm of the state that said counties and rural areas are supposed to stay mostly rural, and so you're not supposed to develop a lot there. So that's kind of out of our hands on some level. we do what
How
we
are you
can.
pushing
I'm pushing that
responsibility?
responsibility, right? Yeah. I mean, I agree with that policy on some level too. You know, I
Sure.
like our rural areas to stay rural. At the same time, that just the point was to put our development pressure into our cities, and our cities for decades were saying we really don't want to grow. We don't want. So you know, when I became a council member at the city of Port Angeles, to build a duplex, you basically needed a double lot, which
Right.
is like, what's the point? You have 2 lots, just build 2 houses.
Yeah.
If your minimum lot size for duplex is 2 lots, just build 2 houses.
Yeah.
We've changed a lot of those policies, but it takes a lot of time for that change to roll out. So I think we have some places that are really trying to, boy, this pepper.
That's a good one. Do you need more milk?
No, actually I will take more milk. That's a good thing. I need help. I'm going to ask for help.
That's not weakness. That's strength,
strength.
Mike. That's strength.
So, you know, I think we've had a lot of cities that are really trying to change, you know, and say, yes, we want more housing. We want different types of housing. We want housing that works, that you can make into, you know, if you think of, in American history, for a long time, we've had the history of, you know, you build a duplex, you live in half and you rent out half. That's a very normal thing for families. It's a way to build wealth for a middle-class family, and it's a way to provide rentals for people that don't have the ability to just jump into home ownership yet.
Right.
So I think, you know, generally speaking, we need a whole bunch of cheap housing units. That's what we need, so that people, you know, and this existed to some level when I was growing up. The first housing units that my wife and I stayed in, the first one was basically what we call an ADU now. It was a mother-in-law apartment that somebody
Right.
had remodeled into a housing unit. And we stayed there and we paid cheap rent, and it was really tiny and really cramped, but that let us save up.
Yeah.
And we saved up to buy a business, and we saved up to buy a house. And if those don't exist, those people who are starting out their you know, careers, which, you know, most people have a career trajectory where they make more money 20 years later, right?
Right.
But if in those first 20 years, if you have no ability to save any money because your housing costs are 70% of your income,
Or food costs.
or your food costs,
Or transportation
whatever,
costs. Yeah.
yeah, if your basic needs costs are, you know, that high, you can't save money, so you can't ever make that jump. And so that's the one challenge that people have. I think the public sector has a place in there. I think they have a place to like make those investments if the private sector is unable to. And so that's what at Clallam County we've really tried to say. We have a sales tax that contributes to a fund that we use to build cheap housing units. And so that's, you know, I think that's working at both levels. Number one, it's creating more housing units, but it's also making the tourists pay in,
Right.
because it's a sales tax.
They're,
So all
they're
the sales
supporting our
activity,
town just by coming.
they're supporting our town just by coming.
Okay. Again, I feel like this could be another whole episode.
We could.
I do think it's interesting to see the connection between a handful of these questions and
Very much.
where you've already answered parts of the question previously. Let's eat some mango head.
Okay. Mango sounds fruity and nice, right?
Sure does.
It's not gonna like
Yeah, it sounds
betray
nice.
me.
No, not at all. I think
There's
we
a
gave it a new
saying right on
tagline.
there?
Yeah,
Alright, good.
Mango won't betray you. I'm kidding, it will.
Feeling some heat though.
Oh, it shows up. What's missing from the way we currently approach poverty and food access in Clallam County? And where do you see room for real change?
What's missing? I think again, I want to go back to that community building. I want to go back to like, you know, having more of a sense of community and neighborhood and just the human interaction. I think that's the big lesson learned from the pandemic is we need to have more of that, not less of it. Less of it is bad for all of us.
Yeah.
More of it is good. And center food. What's the second part of the question? Where do you see real room for change?
Where do you see room for
I
real
think
change?
again,
Yeah.
continuing to really push the removal of stigma, and again, like the change to the market here. That's the exact kind of change that I like to see. I want to see that spread. You guys are kind of the hub for all of our food banks. We have food banks out in Clallam Bay CQ, the New Day Food Bank. We have a food bank out in Forks.
Yeah.
And you know, when you say room for real change, I think there's a lot of room for people to be involved in that change. So yeah, I want to see more food banks take up this model, which the small food banks, I'm not sure what capacity they have to do it, but
Right.
I love the model and I want to see more community building around food. Because it's you know, when I think of my family, like when we're all together, It's all food is right there at the center. We cook a
Yeah.
big meal together and we eat together, and that's the day. Like that's all you need for some of those days.
Right. Well, and I think the peripheral activities then, you know, the I didn't participate as a cook when I was a little kid going to potlucks at church, but I had a community of other kids that I ran around with, and we got into any trouble we could in a giant social hall with a bunch of adults.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
sounds great.
Yeah, and so I think that's to speak to your idea of building this community. You're going to invariably end up doing things that aren't just food based.
Yep.
But if food is the center, then we all get to eat.
I mean, I see it through the public sector lens. We have tons of public meetings all the time where we really want the public to come and tell us what they think, and nobody shows up, right? Like so many of our public meetings, we don't get a lot of what happens when you provide food.
People show up.
People show up.
So you need to start grilling.
So we provide food, right? When we have the opportunity, and we have these like rules that prevent our auditors won't like this part. So like, hopefully she won't watch this, but you know, we have these rules that prevent us sometimes. We have this gift of public funds rule, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think provide food. Like that's my like advice. If you have a meeting, you want people to come, provide food, provide dinner, provide childcare. That's how you get people involved, because you're
Right.
removing those barriers and you're centering like that real human activity that people like doing.
Yeah. Well, it saves time, it saves money, it saves energy. The time piece, I think, ultimately ends up kind of being the real premium. And to be, you know, if I have to work and my wife has to work, then we come home and it's 6 o'clock or 5:30 or
Somebody's
whatever.
got to do dinner.
And nobody's thought about dinner, nobody's cooked dinner. It's like, okay, well now we'll eat at 8.
Yep.
But if I've got little teeny
Or you
kids,
make terrible decisions, right? Yep.
somebody stops at Frugal's on the way home. You know, big
Love
ups to
Frugals.
Frugals. Yeah,
Love Frugals.
I'm not knocking
And
Frugals.
I will also say, I think a hamburger is a lot more healthy than most people will give it credit for. I think the other aspects of the fast food are really where you get in trouble. The big sugary soda and the salty fries.
It's
Hamburgers, they got everything. You got a little bit of bread, you got a little bit of protein, you got some veggies.
it's a
I'm
perfect
a
meal.
pro hamburger
Yeah,
politician.
pizza and hamburgers are kind of the perfect meal.
Pizza, you got some convincing, you got some convincing to do.
It's got carbs, it's
I
got
love
protein.
pizza.
You throw some artichoke hearts on that sucker. now
I
you
mean,
got vegetable.
You get good toppings on there. I think then you got me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that a hamburger is bad. A hamburger every night is bad. And so I think where we end up in the issue, the reason I bring up something like swinging through Frugals, if it's every night that
Yeah.
I'm forced to make that
That's-
choice,
Yeah.
that's not healthy.
And when you got sports practice and you got all these other things and you got to go to this meeting and that, yeah, it becomes really easy to make those choices.
So would your auditor accept a outside organization providing food
absolutely.
at one of your meetings?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if Little Devils is listening, or if Blueberry Cafe is listening, or
Yeah.
I'm just saying, throwing it out there. Maybe Frugals has a food truck.
Yeah.
Maybe they would do a burger.
Learn about the comprehensive plan and have a burger. I think people would get on board with that.
I would love to listen to anything over a burger.
You're like, whatever boring plan you want to talk
Right?
about.
No, you talk about it. I will eat my burger and it'll be fun. Okay, let's try that ghost. This one will betray you.
All right. It says right on the bottle.
Right. I hate you. Wow, that's aggressive.
Oh, boy. Oh man, you just dumped mine.
I gave myself more. Okay,
All right,
I felt
all right,
bad.
all right.
I wasn't trying to hurt you, or was I? I don't know.
I'm not sure at this
Cheers. Not long ago. Okay. Many families have lived in Clallam County for generations, but rising costs are pushing them out. Is it important to you that families with deep roots in Clallam County can afford to stay here? And what responsibility do you think local leaders have to make that possible?
Yes. And I do think we have a responsibility to make it possible, right? This is a question really about gentrification and how do you make sure that your community has a place to live while still you have that appropriate level of development that's happening. And so I think on our peninsula, it's not, wow, this is a really good one. I think on our peninsula, we don't generally have the pressures that a lot of big cities have when it comes to gentrification, where you get the sense that there's some cities that are just like selling an entire part of their city to a developer because that's their only, the city feels like that's their only choice.
I don't think we have that kind of situation happening, but I do think that in Clallam County, where this comes up is you have like a historic family that had a holding and they want to subdivide and develop, and they get limited by things like the Growth Management Act. And so I think it becomes real, but I think that, again, focusing on workforce housing, focus on affordable housing, that's how we make sure that people can still stay in their community for years. Man, this one is going on me.
It's good.
It is going.
Yeah. Kicked in, right?
For years, I think all of us have heard the number one export of Clallam County is our kids. And that's I think what one of the things this question is getting at is how do we make sure that that's not the case? And so it's not just about housing costs, it's not just about gentrification. I think it's also about making sure that there are career paths available for our kids.
Yeah.
In a variety of ways. And so that's definitely one of the things that we talk about a lot with our Recompete effort with Peninsula College is we want to find, the working age population jobs. We also want to make sure that we're integrating our CTE, our high schools, and our community college into a system so that people feel like there's a place where they can land in the economy here on the North Olympic Peninsula that'll be meaningful.
Well, I think that's, for me, that's probably one of the most important pieces is, I've worked as a cook. I've had more jobs than most people I know, and more different types of jobs. And more often than not, I'm more willing to take a job that I feel will be meaningful. I was a paraeducator. I made $21,000 a year.
Right.
That's not a family wage job.
No.
But there is no more rewarding job that I know of. I remember a handful of teachers throughout my life incredibly fondly and still come to mind periodically. And what's crazy is to think that I am that teacher or I am that individual,
But I can't afford
but I am that person for some kids out there, and they'll carry that memory. Hopefully I had a positive impact on their life. I can't afford to do it.
Yep.
But how amazing was it to do that? So finding meaning in those jobs and finding something but yes, keeping a pipeline for people to stay here and be able to afford to stay here and find meaning that's definitely important.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard for me to think right now
I know
because of what's happening in my mouth region.
This is good TV.
Yeah.
All right.
I definitely had thoughts on that question that are just gone.
Well, just send us a video later. We'll post it online.
Send a video of me eating cheesecake later.
Yeah.
To soak up all the capsaicin.
nice blanket wrapped around. All right, you want to hand me that scorpion?
No, I'm gonna run.
This one's good. All right, the last sauce, Scorpion by Seafire Gourmet. Emphasis on fire.
I don't have taste buds left,
I got
man.
wings.
Oh, wings. I've always found that the runnier, hotter sauces, the runnier it is, the more dangerous it is because it's just concentrate. It's just liquid fire.
Well, the upside is I'm not gonna be able to taste this.
Cheers.
Doesn't matter.
Oh, there you go. Hey, I like that you look on the bright side.
It's good. It's good flavor.
It's amazing flavor. It's sweet. It's tangy. It's got a nice acidity to it, and then it kicks you in the butt.
I'm just waiting for the knife in my back.
Oh man, you're gonna hate that. Okay.
Gotta eat every chicken bit to soak it up.
Yep. Now that your taste buds are destroyed, here's your platform. What do you want people watching this to do right now to help fight food insecurity in their community? I'm gonna drink milk.
Donate and volunteer, right? We have great food banks. PA Food Bank, Swim Food Bank, Forks Food Bank, Clallam Bay CQ. We have great food banks all spread out throughout the community. All of them need help. Donate and volunteer. I think there's a lot of ways to volunteer. I think the organizations make it easy. They make it easy to be involved. And there's different levels. Some of them might need board members, especially at the smaller food banks. Like, board members are hard to come by, and if you have a skill set, get involved. The Forks Food Bank just recently, the pastor of the Congregational Church retired from his other job at the Department of Corrections, and now he's a board member at the Forks Food Bank, and he's got all sorts of energy and ideas that he's able to contribute. But it starts with him volunteering his time.
Yeah.
And so that's community building. That's a way to get involved. Not everybody's a board member. Some people are just
coming 1 day a week and helping out. And some people, don't have the ability to come down and lift heavy things or move stuff around, do whatever needs to be done. But you can make a monthly donation. It can be a small monthly donation. I think we have, one of the more interesting developments that's happened recently in the nonprofit community here is 4PA saying, hey, what about a $10 donation a month? That's doable for a lot of folks. You can do that to the food bank, right?
Yeah.
That's doable. You can set up that recurring donation.
Yeah.
You can feel like you're part of the effort. And so that's I think the number one thing to do is get involved.
Excellent.
Volunteer, donate.
Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, this was fun. And I can't feel my mouth.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right?
It's very good. I think it was a lot of fun. You didn't make me cry. I'll give you that.
My eyes
Yet.
are watering a touch. We've got a couple hotter sauces if you want to stick around for the burning questions after hours.